they escaped the prison. But one question still follows the case. Did they survive the water? In June 1962, 3 men vanished from Alcatraz, an island built to make escape impossible. The official story sounds simple at first. Frank Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin left their cells during the night. A 4th man, Alan West, was part of the plan, but he did not leave with them. By morning, the beds still looked occupied. The men were gone, and somewhere beyond the walls, their route disappeared into San Francisco Bay. But the strange part is not only that they escaped their cells. The strange part is that no one can prove exactly where the escape ended. No confirmed landing, no recovered bodies, no final answer that everyone accepts. Only a prison, a cold stretch of water, and a question that has survived for decades. Did they drown before reaching land? Or did they survive the escape route no one could prove? To understand why this case still feels unfinished, you have to look at Alcatraz differently. Most prisons are built around walls, fences, towers, and locks. Alcatraz had all of those. But its strongest barrier was not made of concrete or steel. It was geography. The island sat in San Francisco Bay, close enough for the city lights to be seen, but far enough to make freedom feel unreachable. For a prisoner standing inside the walls, land was visible. The outside world was not hidden. It was right there, across the water. That was part of the punishment. You could see the city. You could see movement. You could see boats passing. But between the island and the shore was cold water, rough tides, shifting currents, and distance. Alcatraz was not designed to be impossible only because of its walls. It was designed to be impossible because of what came after the walls. The bay was the final lock. And in 1962, 3 men decided to test that lock.
It takes information from buses. You're gonna say booking. Will escape in like a one.
By then, Alcatraz had already become a symbol. It was known as the Rock. It held men the federal prison system considered difficult to manage elsewhere. Its reputation was not only about who was inside, it was about the belief that once a man was sent there, he did not leave unless the government allowed it. There had been earlier escape attempts. Some men were caught. Some gave up. Some were lost to the water. No one had ever officially beaten the island. That reputation mattered, because every prison has a physical design. But Alcatraz also had a psychological design. It told prisoners the same thing every day. Even if you get out of the cell, you still have the island. Even if you get off the island, you still have the bay. And if the bay takes you, no one may ever know exactly where you ended. That is why the 1962 escape is different from a normal prison break. The question is not just how 3 men got out. The real question is what happened after they did.
Tonight, after the last round, with the last rain, by the third drain pipe.
The men at the center of the story were Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers, John and Clarence. Morris had a reputation for intelligence and planning. The Anglin brothers were close, disciplined, and used to working together. Alan West was also connected to the escape plan, but on the night itself, he didn't leave with them. That small failure changed everything, because the story that became famous was not the story of 4 men leaving Alcatraz. It became the story of 3 men disappearing. The plan did not depend on strength alone. It depended on patience. It depended on routine. And that may be the most important detail in the entire escape. In any secure place, routine can be more dangerous than weakness. A weak wall is obvious. A broken lock is obvious. A missing prisoner is obvious. But routine can become invisible. Guards make rounds. Lights go out. Sounds repeat. Doors close. The same checks happen night after night. Over time, a system starts trusting its own rhythm. The escape plan used that rhythm. For months, the men prepared while the prison kept moving around them. They hid their progress inside the familiar shape of daily life. They created a false picture of normality. And on the final night, that false picture mattered more than force, because the plan was not simply to get out. The plan was to make it look, for just long enough, like no one had left. That is where the dummy heads came in. When guards looked into the cells, they did not see empty beds. They saw what they expected to see: a head on a pillow, a body shape under a blanket. Silence, stillness, routine. It was deception built around expectation. And once expectation did its job, the men moved through the prison's hidden spaces. Not like ghosts, but like men who had studied the building long enough to know where the official path ended and the forgotten spaces began. This is why the escape still feels cinematic. Even without exaggeration, there was no public alarm as they moved, no dramatic chase through the cell house, no confirmed sighting of them running across the island. Just a prison moving through another night, while 3 men were no longer where the system believed they were. Outside the cell block, the second part of the problem began. Leaving the cells was one thing, leaving the island was something else. The men still needed to cross open water. They had prepared for the bay, but history has never been able to prove what happened when those preparations met the real conditions outside. That is the point where certainty begins to break down. Inside the prison, investigators could reconstruct parts of the escape. They could look at the cells. They could look at the decoys. They could look at the route through the building. They could interview Alan West, the man left behind, but outside, the evidence became weaker. The bay did not preserve a clean timeline. Water moves, debris moves. A route drawn on a map can look possible. A route in cold moving water is something else. On the night of June 11th, 1962. The prison still stood behind them. The city lights were ahead, and between the two was the part of the escape no one could later prove. If they reached the water, they had already done what Alcatraz said could not be done. But they had not yet reached freedom. They had reached the real test. The escape was discovered the next morning. The illusion had lasted long enough. Then it broke. What had looked like sleeping prisoners was no longer convincing. The beds were checked. The cells were searched. The truth moved through the prison quickly. Frank Morris was gone. John Anglin was gone. Clarence Anglin was gone. Alan West was still there. And Alcatraz, the prison that had built its legend on being almost impossible to escape, now had to answer the question the public would never stop asking: where did they go? The search began with the most likely answer: the bay. If the men had left the island, then the water was either their path to freedom or the place where the escape ended. Investigators looked for traces, debris, personal items, signs that their plan had failed, evidence that the men had been pulled off course. The official conclusion eventually leaned toward drowning. That answer is not unreasonable. San Francisco Bay was not a calm swimming pool. It was cold, tidal, and dangerous. Even a strong person could be overwhelmed. Even a good plan could fail when it reached open water. And if the men entered the bay at the wrong moment, the same water that made Alcatraz famous could have erased them. But the problem is this: a likely answer is not the same as a proven ending. Authorities could say they most likely drowned, but they could not show the final moment. They could not point to a confirmed landing. They could not point to recovered bodies. They could not close the mystery in the public mind. That space between probability and proof is where the Alcatraz escape became more than a prison story. It became a root mystery. Over the years, the case attracted leads, claims, and theories. Some were weak. Some were strange. Some came from family members. Some came from people who believed the official story had missed something. The strongest versions of the survival theory usually depend on the same basic idea. The men did not need to defeat the entire bay forever. They only needed to survive long enough to reach help, land, or second plan outside the prison. But every survival theory has the same problem. Evidence, not possibility. Evidence. A person can imagine a route. A map can show a path. A later claim can sound dramatic. But history needs something stronger. A confirmed document, a verified sighting, a reliable chain of proof. That has never been publicly established. Decades later, one of the most famous leads came from a letter received in 2013, allegedly written by John Anglin. The letter claimed the men had survived. It claimed Morris and Clarence Anglin had died years later. It claimed the writer was still alive and ill. For a moment, the old mystery felt alive again, but tests on the letter did not solve the case. The results were inconclusive, and once again, the escape returned to the same place it had always been, between belief and proof. That is why the Alcatraz story still works. Maybe the bay took them before they reached land. Maybe they reached farther than the government could prove. Maybe the truth disappeared somewhere between the island, the current, and the dark water of San Francisco Bay. But one thing is certain. On June 11th, 1962, 3 men left Alcatraz and entered a part of history where evidence becomes thin, certainty becomes dangerous, and the map ends before the story does. They escaped the prison, but the water kept the secret. Next on Escape Lore, the expedition that vanished into ice, silence, and unanswered questions.